Day Before might just be one of the biggest disasters in recent gaming history. It went from being the most wishlisted game on Steam to the studio closing down 4 days after release. From fake gameplay to outright lying about the entire game, let's take a look at how Fntastic managed to deceive millions of people and how this one scam will affect the gaming industry for years to come. By the way, before we get into the video, if you're one of the many people who were unfortunately scammed into buying the game and now you can't even play because the entire game was shut down on January 22nd, I'm just letting you know that you can get a full refund regardless of how much you played it, so please go get your money back. The Day Before started development in 2018, and to say that the development process was hell would be an understatement. With inconsistent communication and numerous delays, Fntastic had a lot of people in doubt that this game would ever see the light of day. The studio first announced the game in 2021, with the initial release date being set for March 1st, 2023, which would later be delayed to December 7th. The disastrous release eventually did happen on December 7th, but was shortly followed by the closure of the studio on December 11th, and the shutdown of the entire game just 46 days after release. So to see how all of this happened, let's take a look behind the scenes and see what went wrong in the years leading up to the release of The Day Before. So when The Day Before first got revealed, everyone was wondering how these talented developers managed to appear seemingly out of nowhere and deliver such a promising game. Clearly this has to be some big development team with tons of resources and years of experience, right? Well, not quite. The only two people who officially worked on the game were Eduard and Aisen Gotovtsev, who are also the two brothers who founded the studio. Fntastic has previously released a few forgettable games, one of which even got delisted from Steam for whatever reason, and a game some of you might have even heard of, Prop Night, which is, as of recording this video, still playable. But with a history like this, we should have seen the warning signs. Unfortunately, a lot of people, myself included, got fooled by the game trailers and promises. I mean, can you blame us? If the trailers were real, this would have been one of the best looking and most feature-packed games to date. It looked absolutely incredible. And with the added promise of PvP, base crafting, weapon customization, and amazing combat, we were hooked. This is what the fans of the MMO survival genre were waiting for. And as a result, The Day Before went on to be the most wishlisted game on Steam.
Millions of people have added The Day Before to their wishlist, making The Day Before one of the most anticipated games in the world. Feeling and understanding the great responsibility that we face, with enormous gratitude in our hearts, we're pleased to announce that The Day Before is switching to the new Unreal Engine 5 technology. The transition to a more advanced and adapted open worlds engine will make the gameplay of The Day Before even more fantastic. In this regard, we inform you that the new release date of the game will be March 1st, 2023.
Fast forward a few months, we get a new trailer showing off more of the game features, which suspiciously looked a lot like a game called The Division. Keep that in mind because it will be important later. So the trailers that we saw from Nvidia showcasing the ray tracing capabilities in The Day Before, those were actually fake. Turns out that the footage used was a completely different build of the game that was only used for making these trailers. The final release of the game didn't even include many of the features that were promised, like ray tracing, and even the employees at Nvidia started to doubt the existence of the game. So Fntastic basically managed to fool Nvidia with a completely different build. The developers were ordered to make cinematic trailers and graphics in order to convince Nvidia and gain their support. Companies like IGN and Nvidia were essentially lied to and deceived into featuring this scam on their platforms. But remember when I told you to keep in mind how the trailers looked really familiar to those of another game? Well, it turns out that many of the game trailers were frame-by-frame copies of the trailers for The Division. So after faking features and outright lying to IGN and Nvidia, they even copied other people's work. But trust me, it gets worse. It gets so much worse. You know the brothers that founded Fntastic? Well, turns out they're even worse people than we thought. A few developers who used to work at Fntastic spoke out and exposed what they did. Before the release of the previously mentioned game Prop Night, the developers were locked in their offices for weeks at a time in an effort to get the game out before the deadline. And their reason for doing so was this is how games should be made. The developers were not allowed to go home, they couldn't shower, and sometimes they didn't even eat. This just goes to show how terrible the Gotovtsev brothers actually are. They are crazy egomaniacs who had grand visions and even compared themselves to Hideo Kojima after the success of Prop Night. They had insane expectations for the day before, which meant terrible treatment of their employees, long crunch times, and inhumane working conditions. Apparently, the developers wrote more than 500 gigabytes of code for the day before, but because the brothers kept jumping from concept to concept, the developers were forced to rewrite the code from scratch numerous times. It seemed as if everything was dependent on the mood of the two brothers, because the day before was originally being developed as a single-player game for years, but one day the brothers decided to change their mind and said that the day before is from now on an MMO, again forcing the developers to basically rewrite the entire game from scratch. On numerous occasions, the developers were forced to redo entire parts of the map, redesign the UI elements, and to finish work that would usually take days or weeks to complete overnight, which were completely removed from the game the next day because the brothers changed their mind again. The worst part about all this is that the developers couldn't fight back. Anyone that spoke out against the brothers was immediately fired, forcing the developers to either burn out and work insane hours or lose all financial stability provided by their job working at Fntastic. And this is not a coincidence. The Gotovtsev brothers specifically employed people from rural areas, offering them good money and a AAA game in their portfolio, basically giving them an offer they can't refuse. A few months before the official release of the game, the publisher company Maytona actually saw the game for the first time, and they were terrified. What they saw was an untested, buggy, and unfinished mess of a game that was nowhere near being ready for a full release. What I find really weird is how is it possible that the game was barely tested, and how did Maytona just blindly trust Fntastic and only saw the game a few months before release? A publishing company that potentially spent millions in funding for this game had no idea what the game even looks like after all these years in development. Allegedly, when Maytona sent specialists to Fntastic, they reported back saying that the game is beyond saving. It would need more than a year to be fixed and should just be released as is. Well, on December 7th, the big day finally came. The day of the official release when all the eyes were on Fntastic to see what they made in all these years. And unsurprisingly, the Gotovtsev brothers missed the entire thing and basically forced the developers to make all the decisions themselves. They took the money and ran. It was clear that the game had tons of issues and was nowhere near finished, but the developers managed to fix 80% of the problems with hotfixes. However, these hotfixes will be implemented next week because Dr. Disrespect was streaming the day before over the weekend. Monday rolls around and the developers were eager to implement the new hotfixes but were met with the crushing refund numbers and of course the infamous tweet announcing the closure of the entire studio.
Today we announce the closure of Fntastic Studio. Unfortunately, the day before has failed financially, and we lack the funds to continue. All income received is being used to pay off debts to our partners. We invested all our efforts, resources, and man-hours into the development of the day before, which was our first huge game. We really wanted to release new patches to reveal the full potential of the game, but unfortunately, we don't have the funding to continue the work. It's important to note that we didn't take any money from the public during the development of the day before. There were no pre-orders or crowdfunding campaigns. We worked tirelessly for 5 years, pouring our blood, sweat, and tears into the game. At the moment, the future of the day before and Prop Night is unknown, but the servers will remain operational. We apologize if we didn't meet your expectations. We did everything within our power, but unfortunately, we miscalculated our capabilities. Creating games is an incredibly challenging endeavor. We're grateful to everyone who supported us during these difficult years. It's been a fantastic journey over the past 8 years.
Out of 200,000 copies of the game sold, nearly half were refunded, as well as nearly 90% of the Steam reviews being negative. This would go down as one of the biggest disasters in recent gaming history. With that being said, there is one more thing that concerns me. You might think that one company scamming millions of people would be an isolated incident, but I fear it's the opposite. I'm afraid that this might open the floodgates for other companies to take advantage of gamers all around the world. After all, the Gotovtsev brothers are already sending new offers to developers about a new mobile game they're making. And I find it quite concerning that they were able to walk away from this without facing any consequences. So what I would suggest is that you take any new game announcements from small unknown studios with a grain of salt, and only judge them based on what you see. Try to manage your expectations when they promise incredible worlds and game features, because there's always a chance for the day before situation to repeat. It's unfortunate, but it's true. This one scam will affect all of us in the future and how we perceive game announcements and trailers. With that being said, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like, and if you want to see more content like this, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And I'll see you next time.